Okay, let's move on to the next introduction to R. So here we're going to talk about basic math, variables, and variable types. So of course, at its basics, R is a very powerful calculator. And so we'll just briefly go through how to use it like a calculator. And so just like with kind of any programming language, there's a lot of standard symbols that are used, and these you can probably guess. Right, so the ones that we'll be using are plus for add, minus for subtract, the asterisk for multiply, the backslash for divide. If you want to take the square root of something, it's SQRT, and then this little caret is raising something to a power. So we can see how these work. So anytime throughout this whole course, anytime there's something in this kind of purpley blue bars, these are commands that I'd like you to type in your computer. So please, it might seem very basic to do this, but again, the best way to get used to R is just to use it a lot. And so please pause the video and take the time to write out all of these things. So for example, here's how you would add. So we can do 1 plus 1, and it'll give you the answer 2. I'm going to come back to what this actually means a little bit later, but it will make sense in a little bit. We can do subtraction, so 17 minus 15. That's also, if you hit enter, that will tell you the result is 2. Multiplication, so 2 times 1 will give us 2. And then division, so 4 divided by 2 will also give us 2. Just working with the rest of these, so square root, so square root of 9. If you hit enter, it'll give you 3. 5 to the power of 6, it'll give you the result to that. And then another way to write the square root of 9 is 9 to the 1/2 power, and so that's also going to give us 3. Okay, so we're going to be using, these are the basic mathematical operators that you can use in R, and so we'll be using them throughout this course. So parentheses are very, very useful in code to make it very clear what you're doing, and I highly encourage you to use parentheses very liberally in your code. It just makes it much easier to tell what's going on. So if you don't use parentheses, R will proceed in the following order. So it's going to do the powers first, then it will do multiplication and division from left to right, and then it will do addition and subtraction left to right. So for example, if your code just looks like this, it's going to take a reader a while to figure out exactly what's going where, like what's happening when. And so this isn't super clear in terms of code, but this is very clear, right? It's clear what goes together, what's being multiplied, what's being divided by what, and then how one's being added to all of that. So, and of course, where you put your parentheses is going to change the result that you get. So again, I'd say even if you don't feel like you need to, please use parentheses in all of your assignments in code very liberally, because it makes it so much easier to read the code, not just for me, but for your future self as well. So with R, there's no limit to the degree of nesting within parentheses. So you can have multiple levels of parentheses, as long as you can keep it straight for yourself. Okay, so a very important aspect of R, or really any programming language, are what are called variables. And so we're going to spend a bit of time on them. So essentially what a variable is, it's just like a code name for whatever you've assigned to it. So you can assign any value, object, or process to a variable. And again, this variable just becomes a code name for whatever it is that you've assigned to it. So that's kind of abstract. So let's work with an example. So again, you can type this into your computer and into the command line of R. So if we type this, we're saying peanut butter equals 5, but this actually doesn't mean equals. In R, the equal sign is assignment. It's used for assignment, not for equals, and we'll clarify that in a minute. But so what this command is doing is it's assigning the number 5 to the variable called peanut butter. And so now you can use peanut butter in your code anytime you want to use the number 5. And so again, in R, the equals sign is used for assignment. Some of you that are used to R from earlier days, assignment in R used to look like this. It used to be the less than sign and then a dash, so that makes like an arrow. So you could use peanut butter, this arrow, and 5, and that would be assigning 5 to the value of peanut butter. It'd be doing the same thing. But there's been kind of a movement to move towards using just the equal sign. It's much easier just because it's a single character instead of 2 characters. But what this means in R, though, is if equals is used for assignment, then we can't use equals for equals. And so when you want to do equals in R, you actually have to use 2 equal signs. And this will become clear a little bit later. For now, you don't really have to worry about it, but it'll come up later. So you can check that peanut butter has been given the value 5 by typing peanut butter at the R prompt and pressing enter. And so if you type that and put enter, it'll say 5, right? Because we've assigned the value 5 to peanut butter. So similarly, we can assign the value 9 to the variable called jelly. And we can check that it did that by typing jelly at the R prompt and pressing enter. And you should get 9. So you can also assign the results of a process to a variable without knowing what that result is ahead of time, right? So you can assign anything to a variable. So here, we're assigning to the variable bread 6 plus 8 divided by 2. So we don't have to know what this is to do this assignment, right? So then we could type bread and hit enter, and it'll give us the result of that process. So it gives us 7. So we've assigned this process to bread, and it's done the calculation for us. And so you can use variables in any way that you would use their values. So for example, you can add, multiply, divide, all sorts of things, right? So here, since we've already assigned values to peanut butter, jelly, and bread, we could add them all together. So we can do peanut butter plus jelly plus bread is going to give us the sum of their values, which is 21. So again, please type all of these into R as we go. We can also assign that to another variable, right? So we could make a new variable called lunch and assign to that peanut butter plus jelly plus bread. And if you type lunch and hit enter, it should give you 21, right? So again, these variables are just code names for what the underlying value is, but it could also be a process, right? We can assign anything to a variable name. And you can get as crazy as you want with these, right? You can do anything with the variables as you could with their values, right? So we can take the square root of jelly plus bread divided by peanut butter to the 3rd power, right? And R will happily go along and do those calculations using the values for each of those variables. So variables are really where a lot of the power of programming languages come from. And you'll see that as you get to know R a little bit better. So naming habits for your variables. So sometimes it might be tempting to give your variables simple names, like maybe you call your first variable A and your second variable B and your third C and so on. Or maybe call them 1, 2, and 3. So don't do this. This is very bad programming practice. And again, the reason is reproducibility, right? If someone else looks at your code, it doesn't know, A doesn't mean anything to that person. And it doesn't mean anything to you in 10 years when you look back at this code. It's going to be very hard to figure out what's what. Instead, you should make your variable names clear and meaningful, right? So that's going to make your code clear in 1 week, in 1 month, in 1 year. And it's going to make your code clear to others who may be using it or grading it. So make sure that you use meaningful names for your variables. One important thing, though, is you can't have any spaces in your variable names. You can have underscores or periods, in your variable names, but you cannot have spaces in them. Okay, I think I'll stop here before we move on to variable types.